In the heart of Maplewood, a quiet suburban town nestled between golden fields and sleepy streets, lived a little girl named Emma Carson. She was 7 years old, with tangled chestnut curls, a dimple on her right cheek, and a quiet kind of magic in her smile. Unlike most kids her age who were glued to screens or tangled in endless toys, Emma preferred being outside, under trees, beside creeks, or sprawled in the backyard with a notebook full of drawings and dreams. But what truly made Emma special wasn't her imagination. It was her connection to a dog named Shadow. Shadow was a massive, handsome German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat that shimmered like smoky silver under the sun. He had a noble posture, one that made strangers pause, a balance of strength and calm. But to Emma, Shadow was nothing more or less than her best friend, her protector, her secret keeper. Their bond wasn't just born out of love. It was shaped by something deeper. Emma's father, Mark Carson, had spent over a decade working with K-9 units in law enforcement. He'd seen the worst of the world and had come home more than once with stories he never fully shared. But when he retired, he poured all his knowledge into one thing: raising Shadow. From the day the puppy arrived at their doorstep, Mark trained him with care, patience, and precision. Shadow wasn't aggressive, but he was disciplined, smart, loyal, and Emma had grown up right alongside him. By the time she was 5, Emma could whisper soft commands into Shadow's ear, ones her father had taught her, and he'd respond instantly. Sit, stay, follow, hide, wait, go. Each word was practiced gently and repeatedly. Mark had once joked, "He listens to her better than he ever did to me." And it was true. There was a language between the girl and her dog, one that needed few words at all. The neighbors marveled at them. "Look at that girl, old mister," Thompson from across the street would say, watching them through his window. "She's walking that dog like she's the one in charge." And she was out in the evenings. Emma would lie on the grass, reading fairy tale out to Shadow. Sometimes he would rest his head on her chest and close his eyes, as if he too was dreaming of dragons and castles. Other times they would race through the woods at the edge of town, Shadow slowing down just enough for Emma to feel like she was winning. It wasn't unusual for her to whisper secrets to him, about a boy at school she didn't like, or how her mom's macaroni was always too cheesy. Shadow never judged. He just listened. And when storms rolled in, thunder loud and sudden, Emma didn't run to her parents' room. She curled up beside Shadow, her fingers twisted into the fur around his neck. His calmness steadied her. His heartbeat, slow and steady, made the thunder seem less frightening. Mark often watched them from the porch, coffee in hand, and smiled to himself. He had trained police dogs before, but never seen a connection like this. Shadow wasn't just protecting Emma. He adored her. And Emma, in her young, innocent way, understood that. She respected him. She never tugged his ears or treated him like a toy. She treated him like a partner. People would often say, "He's just a dog." But Emma never believed that. She believed Shadow could understand her, not just her words, but her feelings. When she was sad, he'd lay his head on her lap. When she was sick, he wouldn't leave her bedside. When she was joyful, he'd prance like a puppy, matching her energy. It was a bond that felt unbreakable. But even bonds like these, forged in peace and play, are sometimes tested in ways no one can predict. And neither Emma, nor her family, nor the quiet town of Maplewood could have guessed that very soon, in the middle of a sunny afternoon, one whispered word from a little girl would change everything. Saturday mornings in Maplewood were always peaceful, but this one felt especially perfect. The sun glowed gently through a patchwork of white clouds. The air was crisp but warm, and the town's largest park, Evergreen Meadows, was buzzing with weekend life. Children zipped through the open grass with kites and bubbles. Couples lounged on blankets, and the scent of grilled burgers drifted in from nearby picnic areas. Emma Carson skipped ahead of her parents, a red and white picnic basket swinging in her mother's hands. Shadow trotted beside her, his tongue lolling out, eyes alert but relaxed. His leash was wrapped around Emma's wrist, though Mark, her father, had already nodded with quiet approval for her to let it go once they reached the open field. Shadow didn't need a leash. Not with Emma. They found a shady spot near a tall oak tree where the grass was thick and soft. Mark spread out a blanket while Emma immediately freed Shadow, tossing his favorite ball. The German shepherd bounded after it with a graceful leap, drawing smiles from nearby families. Children watched in fascination as Shadow caught the ball in mid-air and dropped it gently at Emma's feet without ever being told. "He's like a magician dog," one boy whispered to his sister. Emma beamed. "He just knows." As the adults unpacked sandwiches and lemonade, Emma and Shadow played in a clearing a few feet away. She laughed freely, the sound light and musical. Shadow chased her, then slowed to let her catch him. It was a dance they knew well, child and guardian in a world of their own. But even in the middle of so much joy, something felt off. Unseen by Emma's parents and most of the parkgoers, a man stood beneath a cluster of trees near the edge of the playground. He wore dark jeans and a baseball cap pulled low, his hands buried in his pockets. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't with any children. And he wasn't moving much, just watching the children. His eyes scanned field slowly, deliberately, until they settled on a toddler wobbling toward a sandbox just beyond the main crowd. The little boy's mother was speaking with another woman, laughing, unaware her son had wandered. Emma had noticed the man minutes earlier. At first, she wasn't sure why. He wasn't doing anything wrong, not technically. But there was something strange in the stillness of his posture. Something stiff, tense. Even at her young age, she could sense when something didn't belong. Shadow sensed it too. He'd stopped mid-chase. His ears perked forward, his body straightened, and his eyes locked on the man. His tail, which moments ago wagged freely, now held steady and rigid. Emma turned to him. "What is it?" she asked softly. Shadow didn't look at her. He didn't blink. His body shifted just slightly, not moving toward the man yet, but preparing. "Daddy?" Emma called, turning toward her father without shouting. Mark looked up from the blanket. "Yeah, honey?" But before Emma could respond, the man moved. Toward them. Toward the toddler. It was subtle. A few steps forward, hands still in his pockets, looking as if he were just strolling. But Shadow tensed further. He let out a low, guttural growl, so soft that only Emma heard it. The toddler's mother laughed again with her friend, still unaware. Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't explain what was happening, but she trusted Shadow more than anyone. If he was worried, she needed to be. The man stopped, turned slightly, and stepped again, this time quicker. The toddler was giggling, digging in the sand. No one was watching him now. Except Shadow. And Emma. And something inside Emma knew. This was no ordinary afternoon. Emma stood frozen, one hand clutching the hem of her shirt, the other reaching out slightly toward Shadow. He hadn't moved yet, not really, but his entire body was on edge. His head was low, ears sharp, tail still. He looked like a coiled spring waiting for a command or a reason. Emma glanced at the man again. He was closer now, definitely closer. The toddler, still completely unaware, sat in the sandbox, digging happily with a yellow plastic shovel. Just behind him, the man paused again, looking from side to side. His movements were off, too measured, too calculated. Shadow's growl deepened, rumbling in his chest like distant thunder. Emma's heartbeat quickened. Her father was only a few feet away, just over her shoulder, but the noise of the park had grown louder. Children shouted. Dogs barked. Someone was playing music on a speaker nearby. It felt like the entire world had gone slightly out of focus, except for Emma, Shadow, and the strange man who now stood only 20 feet from a child who didn't even know he was there. Emma took a slow breath and crouched beside Shadow, placing her hand on his shoulder. His fur bristled beneath her fingers. "Shadow," she whispered. "Is he bad?" Shadow's eyes never left the man. His muscles were taut, trembling slightly with restrained energy. Then the man moved again, not a casual step, a direct one, quick and quiet, his eyes now locked onto the toddler. One more step, another. Shadow took a half step forward, growl rising, louder this time. The man paused, looked up. For the first time, his eyes met Emma's. She couldn't describe the feeling, not at that age, but it felt cold, like she'd been dropped into icy water. His stare was blank, not surprised, not angry, just empty. Then he smiled, just slightly, as if to say, "You can't stop this." Emma's breath hitched in her throat. Her mind raced. Was he just another adult? Maybe the toddler's uncle. Maybe a stranger who'd gotten confused. But no. Shadow knew. And Emma had learned to always trust Shadow. She turned her head and looked for the toddler's mom. Still talking. Laughing. No one was watching. She looked back. The man reached into his pocket. Emma's instincts screamed. She didn't know if it would be too late. Didn't know if anyone would believe her. But she had to act. She leaned in, close to Shadow's ear. Her voice was quiet, calm. "Wait," she whispered. It was a word he knew well, a practiced command. And Shadow obeyed, still. Focused. Emma rose to her feet and stepped slowly toward the blanket where her father was sipping lemonade. "Dad," she said, this time a little louder. "Something's wrong." Mark looked up instantly, recognizing the shift in her voice. She wasn't whining. She wasn't scared. She was serious. "Show me." Emma pointed, her hand trembling. By the time Mark turned toward the sandbox, the man was just 3 steps away from the toddler, and that was the moment when everything snapped into motion. The toddler's mother screamed, a sharp, shrill sound that pierced the air. Someone else shouted. A woman dropped her drink. A boy started crying. The crowd turned like a wave, all eyes suddenly on the man who had now stretched out an arm toward the little boy's back. People were confused, panicking, trying to piece together what they were seeing. Emma didn't wait. She turned to Shadow and whispered just one word, a word that didn't need volume to carry weight. "Go." And Shadow went. The word barely left Emma's lips before Shadow exploded into action. One moment he was a statue, tense and silent. The next, he was a force of nature muscles surging, paws tearing through the grass, a low snarl rumbling from deep in his throat. Emma stood rooted to the spot, her heart in her throat, watching as her best friend leapt into motion with terrifying purpose. People turned. Some gasped, others screamed. The man didn't notice immediately. He was still focused on the toddler, who now stared up at him with wide, confused eyes. His small hands clutched the plastic shovel. The man bent slightly, his hand brushing the child's shoulder. Then bam. Shadow hit him like a missile. The sound was shocking. A heavy thud of flesh and fur colliding with bone. The man was thrown backward, crashing to the ground with a stunned grunt. The toddler stumbled, but didn't fall. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't bite. He did exactly what he'd been trained to do. He pinned with lightning precision. Shadow planted both front paws on the man's chest and growled deep, holding. him flat to the grass. His weight alone was enough to keep the man down, but it was the snarl that kept him frozen. Shadow's eyes blazed, fangs bare only inches from the man's face. The entire park seemed to hold its breath. The toddler burst into tears. His mother sprinted over, screaming his name, yanking him away and cradling him tightly to her chest. A group of parents began shouting, some at the man, some at each other, others in confusion. A few people began recording on their phones. Emma stood just behind them, shaking, her hand clenched at her side. Her father ran forward, yelling, "Shadow, hold." The German shepherd didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was, his body a perfect, trained barrier between danger and the innocent. The man, now pale and sweating, tried to speak. I didn't do anything. Mark reached him seconds later, stepping between Shadow and the man. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted it behind his back, restraining him like he'd done 100 times before in his canine days. He patted the man down swiftly and then froze. From the man's jacket pocket, he pulled out a folded bandana and a zip tie. Mark's face turned to stone. "You are going to take him," he said quietly, horror dawning across his features. Man squirmed. "No. I swear. I thought he was lost." Mark didn't listen. He had seen this before. Too many times. Shadow backed away, only when Mark gave the release command. The dog retreated beside Emma, breathing hard but calm now, tail down, head still high. Emma looked up at him, eyes shining with a mix of fear and awe. She dropped to her knees and hugged him tightly. Shadow leaned into her, nuzzling her shoulder. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. The crowd began to murmur, realization dawning. A few parents approached Emma, thanking her, some of them even tearing up. One woman dropped to her knees beside the toddler's mother, who kept rocking her son, whispering over and over, "You're safe, baby. You're safe." Mark stood over the man, keeping a firm knee to his back. As the sirens grew louder, Emma held Shadow close and whispered, "Good boy. You're my hero." And though Shadow couldn't speak, he nuzzled her cheek gently as if to say, "I've got you. I always will." The moment passed, but the shock didn't fade. In a park full of families, on what had started as a normal sunny afternoon, one little girl had whispered a single word, and the dog who loved her had listened. The park was no longer a place of joy. Children clung to their parents. Conversations turned into hushed whispers. The once lively picnic grounds felt heavy now, a silent witness to something darker than anyone had expected. All eyes were on the man pinned beneath Mark Carson's knee, still protesting weakly as sirens wailed louder in the distance. Shadow sat beside Emma, calm but watchful, his fur ruffling in the breeze. Emma hadn't let go of his collar, even though he no longer needed her guidance. She just wanted to be near him, her heartbeat slowly calming thanks to his presence. 2 police cruisers rolled into the parking lot moments later. Blue lights flickered against the park benches and cast long shadows across the grass. Officer Karen Ellis, a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, stepped out first. Her partner, Officer Jenkins, followed closely behind. Mark raised a hand. "Over here." Officer Ellis blinked in recognition. "Mark Carson?" Mark nodded, motioning to the restrained man. Caught him approaching a child with zip ties and a cloth in his pocket. "My daughter's dog intervened." Jenkins radioed for backup as Ellis knelt beside the man. "Name?" she asked firmly. The man, sweating and trying to maintain a calm face, sighed. "Tyler Grant. I swear, this is a misunderstanding. She cut him off. Don't speak unless you want to make it worse." Emma watched quietly, her little fists balled at her sides. She didn't understand everything, but she knew enough to recognize that this man was dangerous. Shadow had felt it before anyone else had, and that alone gave her confidence that what they'd done was right. While Jenkins cuffed Tyler Grant and read in his rights, Ellis turned to Emma. She crouched down so their eyes were level. "You're the girl who saw him first?" she asked gently. Emma nodded. "I saw him watching the kids. Shadow didn't like him. Then he started walking toward the little boy." Ellis gave her a small smile. "And then I told Shadow to go." Ellis glanced at the German shepherd, now lying protectively at Emma's feet. "Well, good thing you did." Emma's mom knelt beside her, finally having shaken herself from the fear that had frozen her in place during the confrontation. She wrapped her arms around her daughter tightly, trembling. "You are so brave," she whispered. But Emma looked up at Shadow. He was the brave one. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a third officer arrived, this one in plain clothes. Detective Alan Rhodes. He carried a tablet in one hand and had a grim look on his face. "You're not going to believe this," he said, walking straight up to Officer Ellis and Mark. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "We ran facial recognition on the guy. He's not Tyler Grant. His real name is Jeremy Mullen. He's been on a federal watch list for months, suspected of attempting multiple child abductions across 2 states. This would have been number 4, maybe worse." The words hung in the air like a THUNDERCLA. Mark exhaled slowly. He was about to take that kid. Detective Rhodes nodded grimly. And if it hadn't been for her and the dog, everyone turned to Emma again. She shrank a little under the attention, but Shadow nudged her gently with his nose. Ellis smiled again, softer this time. "You and Shadow, you didn't just stop something bad. You saved that boy's life." Emma looked down, overwhelmed. But her eyes stayed on Shadow, whose tail gave a single wag. That night, the local news would cover the story. Little girl and dog foil child abduction in broad daylight. But for Emma, it wasn't about the headlines or the attention. It was about the quiet voice. She trusted the soft command that came from her heart. And the dog who had never once let her down. The next morning, Emma's face was on every screen. In Maplewood and far beyond, news vans crowded the street outside the Carsons' home like ants on a sugar trail. Satellite dishes pointed skyward, microphones pressed forward like microphones at a presidential press conference. The once quiet neighborhood now buzzed with activity. Reporters shouting questions, neighbors whispering from behind their curtains, and strangers driving by slowly to catch a glimpse of the little hero. Emma had never seen her world like this before. Inside, her parents did their best to shield her from the chaos. Mark, once proud of his quiet life after retiring from the K-9 unit, now found himself fielding interview requests from major networks. Laura, his wife, hovered protectively over Emma, who sat in her pajamas on the living room couch. Shadow curled tightly beside her. Shadow didn't like the cameras. His eyes flicked toward the windows constantly, his ears twitching with every unfamiliar noise outside. He remained pressed close to Emma's side, as if reminding her, "Whatever happens, I've got you." Emma, too, didn't like the attention. Not really. At first, it felt exciting. Strangers calling her brave, her classmates texting emojis of medals and trophies. Even the mayor had called, offering a personal thank you and inviting her to an award ceremony in her honor. But underneath it all, Emma felt different. Not in a good way, because she hadn't done it for fame. She hadn't whispered, "Go to be a hero." She'd done it because she trusted Shadow. Because something inside her told her it was right. And now everyone was treating her like she was something more. Or something else entirely. Mark sat beside her, remote in hand, flipping past news segments that showed her face next to Shadow's. The words young hero, guardian dog, and attempted abduction foiled flashed across the screen. Emma finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Do I have to talk on the news again?" Mark paused. "No, sweetheart, not if you don't want to. But they want to see Shadow. They keep saying he's the smartest dog in the world." Mark looked down at the German Shepherd, who blinked up at him with steady, calm eyes. "He's smart," Mark said. "But that's not what makes him special." Emma looked at him curiously. "What makes him special," Mark continued, "is that he knew you. He listened to you, trusted you like you trusted him. That's rare. You too. You understand each other in a way most people never do." Emma leaned against Shadow and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. His tail thumped once. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Mark stood up, glancing through the peephole. His expression changed. "Looks like someone else thinks you're a hero." He opened the door, and standing there was a woman holding a bouquet of white lily and a small boy clutching a red fire truck. Emma gasped softly. It was the toddler. The one from the park. His mother bent down. "He's been asking to thank you. We tried to come yesterday, but..." She gestured to the media vans. It was overwhelming. Emma rose slowly and walked over. The little boy looked up at her, then at Shadow. His eyes were wide with wonder. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and hugged Shadow's leg. Shadow froze at first, then gently licked the boy's ear. The boy laughed. His mother's eyes welled up with tears. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there," she whispered. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart." Emma didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. And that felt like enough. For that moment. Everything else, the news, the cameras, the pressure faded away. It wasn't about the attention anymore. It never had been. It was about being there. About listening to the whisper inside. And about the quiet hero, who never needed applause, just purpose. A week passed, and the frenzy barely slowed, though the media presence faded from the Carson Street. Emma's story didn't. It went viral, shared across every social platform, replayed on morning shows, even discussed by talk show hosts as the kind of courage we need more of in this world. But while the noise outside got quieter, the changes inside Emma's life only grew louder. Shadow was no longer just her dog. He was the dog. Everyone seemed to want a piece of him. A popular pet food brand wanted to feature him in a commercial. A national K9 foundation offered to fly Emma and Shadow to D.C. to accept a bravery award. The mayor's office confirmed they'd be holding an official Emma and Shadow Day in town. And then came the big one. It arrived in a thick envelope addressed to Mark Carson. When he opened it, he read it once, then twice. His brows furrowed. His eyes scanned every line. Lavra leaned over to read with him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Emma, curious, sat on the floor beside Shadow, braiding a piece of yarn into his collar. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Mark looked up, hesitant. "It's from the National Service Animal Academy," he said slowly. They want to enroll Shadow." Emma tilted her head. "Enroll?" He nodded. "They've reviewed everything, his training, his reaction, the footage from the park, and they think he's one of the best candidates they've ever seen. They want him to become a certified national-level service K9, a kind of emergency responder dog." Emma blinked. "Like, go away?" Mark exhaled. He'd have to train in California. 6 months. If he passed, he'd be paired with a team that responds to emergencies, earthquakes, floods, even missing children. Lavra spoke gently. "They think he could save more lives." Emma's stomach twisted. That the idea of helping others didn't scare her. It wasn't that. It was losing him. Shadow wasn't just her dog. He was her heart, her whisper partner. Her shadow in every way. They want to take him away? She asked. Her voice thin. Mark knelt in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. They want to offer him something bigger. But they said he doesn't go unless we all agree. Especially you. Emma looked at Shadow. His head rested on her lap, warm and heavy. He looked up at her with those calm, deep brown eyes, so full of knowing. Did he understand? She wasn't sure. But something in her chest told her. Maybe he did. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The park, the child, the people they'd helped. The chance to help more, but also the bedtime snuggles. The early morning licks on her cheek. The way he always listened when no one else could. She sat up suddenly and slipped out of bed. Shadow was curled in his spot near the window, as he always was. His ears perked the second she moved. She walked over quietly and sat beside him. I don't want to say goodbye, she whispered. But I don't want to keep you from doing what you were made to do either. Shadow nuzzled her hand. Gently. Emma leaned her forehead against his. Would you come back? Shadow didn't answer. Of course not. But in her heart, she felt the whisper again. The one she'd felt in the park. The one that said, trust him. And for the first time since the letter came, she began to cry. But it wasn't all sadness. Some of it was pride. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. No camera crews. No reporters. No curious neighbors peeking from windows. Just a cool breeze, a soft sky, and a girl sitting on her front steps with a leash in her hand. And a lump in her throat. Today was the day. Shadow sat beside her, calm as always, his head high, his tail resting gently on the concrete. If he knew what was happening, he didn't show it. But Emma knew. And her heart ached. The van from the National Service Animal Academy pulled into the driveway at 9 a.m. sharp. It was plain white, except for the logo printed neatly on the side. Trained to serve, born to protect. Inside were two handlers, both in matching navy blue polos, both smiling gently when they stepped out. Morning, said the woman, crouching down to Shadow's level. You must be the hero. Shadow gave her a polite sniff, but his eyes stayed on Emma. Mark stood by the porch, arms crossed tightly, watching everything with the alertness of a soldier and the protectiveness of a father. Lavra stood beside him, already dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The handlers explained the next steps. 6 months of advanced service training, specialized in disaster zones and search and rescue operations. They promised regular updates, pictures, videos, and, if Shadow passed the program, he'd return home for a visit before deployment. If, Emma repeated in her mind. Not when. If that made it worse. Are you sure about this? Mark asked. Gently, his voice low. Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt in front of Shadow, taking his big face in her small hands. You don't have to go, she whispered. I'll ask them to leave. We can hide in the treehouse. Shadow blinked slowly, like he was telling her that was silly. Then she whispered again, softer this time. But I know you want to help. Shadow licked her cheek. Emma smiled through her tears. She hugged him one last time, tighter than ever. Promise me you'll come back. Shadow leaned into her, his body warm and strong. Then, with one final glance back, he followed the handler into the van. The door closed with a soft click. The van rolled down the driveway and out of sight. Emma didn't cry then. She just sat, quietly, her hand resting on the spot where his head had been. The days that followed were strange. Quieter. At first, Emma kept waking up early, expecting his cold nose on her face. Then she'd turn and remember he wasn't there. School was different. 2. Everyone still called her brave, but the excitement had faded. She wasn't looking for fame anymore anyway. She just missed her best friend. The updates helped. Every week, A letter came with photos. Shadow training in rubble fields, sniffing for missing people, riding in helicopters, even swimming through simulated flood zones. He looked happy. He looked proud, and that made it a little easier. Months passed. Then, one morning in early spring, Emma came downstairs to find Mark standing at the door, grinning. "There's someone here for you," he said. Emma blinked. Then she heard it, the click-click of claws. On hardwood. She spun around. Shadow. Bigger, somehow stronger, with a fresh vest across his chest that read, "Certified Search and Rescue K9. But his eyes, they were exactly the same. Shadow. She shrieked, flying across the room. He met her halfway, tail wagging wildly, tongue out, spinning in circles like a puppy. Emma laughed and cried all at once, burying her face in his fur. "He came back," she whispered. "He really came back." Mark smiled. "They're deploying him in a few weeks. But they said he had to visit home first." Seems like someone made a lasting impression. That night, as the stars blinked softly above, Emma and Shadow lay side by side under the TREEHOUSE. She leaned close to his ear and whispered one word: "Stay." Shadow didn't move. He just stayed there, silent and strong, her hero, her partner, her shadow. Forever.